welcome to EconVersations. I'm your host, Dr. Dan Sutter with the Johnson Center for Political Economy at Troy University. The rating of the City of Troy's fire department recently is going to improve. This improved rating may save homeowners and businesses money on their insurance, but it also offers the glimpse of how a private company has helped evaluate and assure the quality of a complicated service for over 100 years. Economists refer to this as market-based quality assurance, and it provides an alternative to many government policies like occupational licensing by the state of Alabama. Joining me on EconVersations today to talk about how markets assure quality is my colleague from the Johnson Center, Dr. Dan Smith. Dan, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Well, we're going to change things up a little bit today, and you're going to ask the questions. I'm going to largely talk about the topic. So why don't we get started here?
Yeah, so can you tell me, why does upgrading the City of Troy's fire protection rating, why does that really matter?
Well, it matters because it's a rating that insurance companies use to help determine how much they want to charge for property insurance. How effectively a fire department can respond to fire calls is certainly going to affect how much damage might occur to a home, whether the fire might spread to other houses nearby, and so forth. So it will certainly help us, perhaps save some money on insurance, and it also means that it's a way to see that we're being more effectively protected. Our lives and our persons and our families are more effectively protected, because obviously if the fire department can respond more quickly to put out the fire, they're more likely they'd be able to save people who might be at risk.
Yeah, so a lot of times economists use the term quality assurance to discuss situations like this. Can you explain what quality assurance is, and why is it important in the economy?
Well, it's important because there are many goods and services that are quite complicated. And that's sort of inevitable because we live in a society with a division of labor, a division of knowledge. And it's a good thing that you or I don't have to only consume things that we know how to produce ourselves, or services that we can understand how to provide ourselves. So we have to deal with people, whether it be companies or service providers like plumbers or lawyers, who are supposed to be experts in a topic, but we would lack the knowledge ourselves to be able to, like, say, give a lawyer a quiz to actually tell if they sort of know what they know anything about the law, or determine if a mechanic can actually know something about repairing cars. So when we're at this knowledge disadvantage, we're at a knowledge deficit, then we're always at some risk of being taken advantage of somehow, that somebody could charge us for something that's unnecessary, that the quality of a product may not be quite as good as we think it is. And so it turns out to be, from a society standpoint, it's a matter of trust. How are we going to come up with some way to allow people to trust the statements that are being made about the quality of goods and services?
And bringing that back to the fire protection services, when were those ratings established, and who established those ratings?
Right. Well, they were established all the way back in 1909, and so it does affect, it rates things like the Fire Protection Service. A company called the Insurance Services Office now does the ratings. They were started by another company, but mergers and takeovers. But ISO is the company that now does it. They've done it for a number of years, and like we said, the whole idea of rating fire services go back over 100 years. And it goes back to a time, we might not remember this now, but the Chicago fire of 1871 is probably the best known example, but was hardly the only example of citywide fires that plagued the United States in the 1800s, the 19th century. They were actually quite common. New York, Detroit, Baltimore were some of the cities that suffered these citywide fires. San Francisco, after the 1906 earthquake, it was really a fire that destroyed much of the city. The earthquake had disrupted the water mains, but the fire was really what caused much of the destruction in San Francisco, even after the earthquake. And so insurance companies came to the point of needing to understand. And if you were an insurance company, of course, obviously, if you had insured a bunch of buildings in Chicago, and you were, especially in that time, likely very geographically concentrated, if you were an insurance company, you probably did business in Chicago. And then when like half of the city of Chicago burns at once, that's likely going to put an insurance company out of business. And so this was a threat to the financial survival of insurance companies. They needed to have some idea of what cities had more effective ability to fight and control these fires.
So these are obviously pretty important ratings. How how do we understand what these ratings mean? Like, how does Troy compare to other cities?
Well, it's a good point. Now, ISO comes up with a scale. They assign up to like 105 points to communities. They're based on 4 different factors, but the main one are the quality of the fire response itself, plus the effectiveness of the water supply. And that was especially an issue back in the 100 years ago, whether you were going to be able to have strong enough water mains or enough water available to fight these fires. So those together comprise 90 of the 105 points. And then based on your score, the point score, they convert them into these rating categories. And rating categories go from 1 to 10, with 1 being the best and 10 being the worst rating. And so what you can see, almost 50,000 fire departments or communities are rated nationwide. And Troy's ranking is effective June 1st, is going to go from a 4 to a 3. Now we can see that with a rating of 4, only about 20% of the fire departments had a rating of 4 or better. Moving to 3 now, Troy's going to be in the top 10%. The top 8% of fire departments actually have a rating of 3 or better. And according to Mayor Reeves, we're not that many points away from being able to get to a rating of 2. And if we got to a rating of 2, you can see there's only about 2% of fire departments nationwide that actually have that type of a rating of a 1 or 2 on these rankings.
So in the pursuit of higher ratings, how do citizens hold government officials accountable when it comes to spending tax dollars? For example, Troy Fire Department just purchased 2 new fire trucks. So is this simply just a rating showing how much they're actually spending on these services, or is there a way for citizens to actually receive information on how much care they're getting for each dollar spent?
Well, ISO is attempting to evaluate the quality of the response. And so certainly when the city of Troy recently bought these 2 new fire engines, they mentioned that that they would help improve the quality of our service, and I'm sure that's why the city council and taxpayers were willing to go ahead and pay this. But again, as taxpayers, it comes back to this quality assurance problem. The city council or the fire department can tell us that their service will be better if we buy these new fire engines, but that doesn't mean we know for sure they are. And how can we know? And the ISO ratings give us a way to know this, to have the assurance that yes, some third party is coming in here. They're trying to measure performance of the fire department. They look at things like how quickly the fire departments get there. They look at the capacity. They're looking at specifically at the capacity of the fire pumper trucks, the amount of water that they would be able to deliver to a fire, and things of this nature. And so it turns out that, yes, I think probably these 2 new fire trucks and their upgraded capacities did probably help us with this rating, but at least ISO is trying to come up with ways to measure the actual quality of the response of the fire department. And it's important to point out that insurance companies who are ultimately behind the ISO ratings have a strong incentive to make sure that what ISO is rating is actually tied to how effective fire departments are, because if they were rating just on, say, like spending money, and for instance, the U.S. News and World Report rankings of colleges, many people criticize them, saying like, oh, they pay too much attention to just how much colleges are spending, and assuming that spending is associated with quality. But if you're an insurance company, you surely wouldn't want to give people lower premiums on their homeowners insurance unless there's some kind of what you're satisfied with to be tangible evidence that that's going to actually lead to lower losses when fires occur.
Yeah, so do these ISO ratings help poor communities as well that are in a situation they don't have a lot of financial resources? Does this provide information for them to use as well?
Yeah, it helps assure everybody. So not only in the case of Troy, where we already had a relatively good rating and we see it improve, we can see that there's over a quarter of the fire departments in the country have a rating of 9 or 10. Now, my guess is there's probably no local city officials in any community around the country who say like, yeah, our fire protection isn't very good, but don't worry, maybe your house won't catch on fire. It's likely the case that local officials all across the country are likely going to say good things about their fire service. But what we can see is that the ISO rankings give the communities, say, that have a rating of 10, a way of recognizing, like, yes, the people who seem to know what's going on here say that we're not doing a very good job and we need to improve. And so it gives them a some evidence that they can rely on or use to go back to their local community or their fire department and say, we want changes, and if you, and whoever is running the fire department, if you can't make the changes, maybe we will get somebody else in charge who's going to make the changes necessary. And again, you remember, it's not just like saving money on our insurance, it's also saving lives, when fires occur. So, ratings like this could really help communities that don't have very good ratings help improve their communities before fires occur.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is a fascinating example of fire protection. Does ISO use this in any other markets for quality assurance?
Sure, yes. They actually come out with another set of ratings that rate the effectiveness of building code enforcement by communities across the country. These ratings are much more recent. They stem from the 1990s, and they came about after, when Hurricane Andrew hit South Florida in 1992. South Florida had probably the strongest building code against wind losses on the books. But what we saw in the aftermath, researchers saw in the aftermath, is that code wasn't being enforced very well. And a quarter of the losses in Hurricane Andrew were attributed by experts to simply the code on the books not being enforced. And this alerted the insurance industry. And the same thing actually happened, we saw the same thing happen after the Northridge earthquake in California in 1994. Again, about a quarter of the losses were attributed to a failure to enforce the codes that were on the books. And so this alerted the insurance industry to a problem. They already had the fire protection rating system to go by, and so they worked with ISO to go ahead and start rating communities based on how effectively they are enforcing the building codes that happen to be in place in their communities.
Yeah, so in addition to ISO, is there any other companies like Underwriters Laboratory that offer similar types of quality assurance?
Sure, yes. You mentioned Underwriters Laboratory. I think that's a great example of market-based quality assurance. Underwriters Laboratory is actually a little bit older. It goes back to the late 1800s. And it's it's a independent laboratory that tests the products that different manufacturers come up with, often household appliances. So if you have like hair dryers or vacuum cleaners, other things, electric appliances in your house, they might well have like this UL symbol or seal somewhere on the product. And if it does, what it's telling you is that's a product that was submitted to the Underwriters Laboratory. Their laboratory independently tested it. It's completely separate from the manufacturers. The manufacturers don't run this lab. It's run sort of on behalf of the insurance industry. The insurers wanted to have some evidence about what manufacturers were producing, like appliances that were less likely to cause house fires. Mm-hmm. And Underwriters Laboratory comes up with their seal of approval they place on appliances. And that's a system that's worked well for well over 100 years in that case. And it helps assure both consumers and insurance companies about the quality of and safety of many of the appliances we have in our homes.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Who ultimately pays for Underwriters Laboratories and ISO? How are these quality assurance measures paid for?
Well, that's an interesting question, and there's actually a difference. In the case of Underwriters Laboratory, the manufacturer will pay Underwriters Laboratory to have their product evaluated. And so if you've come up with a new vacuum cleaner, you'd like to have it rated by UL, you would submit it to UL, you'd have to pay them to conduct the independent third-party laboratory investigation. And then your vacuum cleaner either get their seal or not, based on whether they thought it met their quality specifications. In the case of the ISO and the fire protection and building code ratings, insurance companies pay for those. If you're an insurance company and you're going to use those ratings in terms of setting premiums for our business and homeowners insurance rates across the country, you'd be willing to pay to have access for those ratings. So ISO undertakes the very extensive expense of going around and rating 50,000 fire departments across the country, but the insurance companies end up will pay through their subscriptions to the ISO data to get access to those ratings.
Especially in the case of Underwriters Laboratories, is there any concern for conflict of interest involved where, a company's paying them to rate their product? Well, aren't they just going to rate the product favorably?
That's certainly a danger, and I think many people, the first time they get introduced to this whole notion of some type of a market mechanism of quality certification, immediately fear that that's a big problem. And whoever's paying for the evaluations, aren't they going to get the rating that they're paying for? And if Underwriters Laboratory wasn't going to certify your vacuum cleaner, you might be angry and you might not submit future products to them. And so that's certainly a danger. But ultimately, Underwriters Laboratory has nothing but their good word, their seal of approval that they market. They don't actually manufacture vacuum cleaners or other appliances. All they do is test them. And ultimately, it's not just all companies are paying to have or many companies are paying to have their products tested. And if you have a high quality product, you're only going to pay to have it tested by Underwriters Laboratory if you also have confidence that Underwriters Laboratory is not going to put their seal of approval on some shoddy product, because then your quality product would be given the same seal of approval as some rickety or unsafe appliance. And once the word came out, eventually got out to consumers that UL or insurance companies that UL seals don't mean anything anymore, then insurance companies won't take that into account. Consumers won't value the UL seal. And in the long run, you would be left with nothing to actually sell. So ultimately, the company like Underwriters Laboratory or ISO, their word is ultimately all they have to say. And there is always the temptation. And when economists study how markets try to assure quality, it's a constant temptation. There's always potential to make some money today by approving that product that doesn't quite meet your standards if you're UL. That's always a temptation, and that's why, again, sometimes you see a company that for some number of years it offered a high quality product, but then their quality starts to deteriorate. It happens. There's no way to get around that temptation. But again, it does create a way of aligning incentives that can give a company like UL or ISO, and they've done well for over 100 years. It gives them an incentive to actually tell the truth here.
Yeah, so they've clearly done well, but couldn't we take the conflict of interest out of the equation by moving it out of the profit industry and having like a government agency and bureaucrats actually rate these rather than a private company?
And we often do turn to government to try to assure the quality of our products, because I think a lot of people do have this sense of a bureaucrat, since they won't be profiting from it, will have a better incentive. And that may, again, be in the short term. You might reduce that short-term incentive to do something underhanded or for a side payment or some bribe to approve a product that wouldn't meet their standards otherwise. But in the long run, a government agency that rates quality, like say the Department of Energy or the Food and Drug Administration, those bureaucrats don't lose their job if the bureaucracy isn't doing a good job rating the quality. And so if the FDA is not approving new drugs in a safe in a timely fashion, and I think the evidence shows that they don't do a very good job doing that, then the FDA doesn't see their budget reduced. The bureaucrats that work there don't lose their jobs. They don't see their salaries reduced. If UL suffers a loss in their quality of the job that they're doing, they have nothing to sell. They will be out of business in the long run. And so in the long run, the lack of a profit incentive, I think, actually ends up being a detriment for government agencies to try to assure quality.
Yeah, so quality assurance also comes up when you talk about occupational licensing. Can you discuss how these lessons actually relate to that topic about occupational licensing, and specifically in Alabama?
Right, sure. And it's the same basic underlying problem of a knowledge deficit, or economists often like to use the term asymmetric information. Again, these are licenses for, I think, CPAs and doctors and lawyers. And you or I would lack the expertise necessary, even if we wanted to try to quiz a CPA and see, do they know all the laws? Do they know everything that they need to know to be able to do a good job as a CPA? And so, as consumers, we lack the expertise to be able to evaluate these services ourselves. So effectively what we've done is turn to the government to establish some minimum educational or training standards for people who are going to have these different, who are going to work in these different fields, and also to police their behavior. So if a professional, if a lawyer does do something unethical, they are bound by a canon of ethics, and they could face disciplinary action by the state bar associations. And that's supposed to be our mechanism, that if a lawyer does something inappropriate, takes advantage of their asymmetric information to mistreat or cheat a customer in some way, then the customer has a recourse to the state licensing agency, and if they can, revoke a lawyer's bar license, then the lawyer would be out of business. And hopefully that was to give an incentive to professionals to do a good job as well.
Mm-hmm. So that's how occupational works in theory. But in practice, does it actually work so well, or are there conflicts of interest or other types of problems that emerge from government imposing occupational licensing standards?
There are a number of problems that arise in practice. It's a good theory, but it seems to have some problems in practice. And one of the areas where you see a problem is that once the government will also often turn to a group of practitioners from the industry. So they'll turn to the Bar Association, they'll turn to a group of electricians and essentially say to them, what are the reasonable, what are the standards we should require of anybody who wants to be an electrician? Now, that gives the existing electricians or existing lawyers a way to reduce the supply of people able to practice their job by simply raising the educational requirements to an unreasonable level, a level that's not necessarily going to correlate with improved quality of service. So that's one of the problems that arises. I think another problem is that ultimately some of these occupational licensing agencies don't do a very good job policing the practitioners who are not well, who have to, like say, a doctor who hasn't kept up with the advances in medicine, or a doctor who isn't very good. I mean, a handful of doctors, I think, are actually responsible for a vast percentage of the medical malpractice claims. You have a small percentage of bad doctors, a small percentage of unethical lawyers, and our occupational licensing systems don't seem to work very well in disciplining those individuals or driving them out of the profession relative to like what would have happened in a market-based system.
Does the ISO and the UL examples that you discussed, does that provide any insights for how we could do occupational licensing better?
Quite possibly. I think there's a website called the Angies List that allows customers to rate, sort of assembles or aggregates customer ratings of a lot of different professionals you might seek to hire. So if you need to have a contractor or electrician or a plumber, Angies List is one of a number of different websites where you can go to and join the group and then get access to these customer ratings or feedback of different practitioners. So you can see who shows up on time, who does a good job, who tries to overbill you, or won't complete a job on time and extract extra payments and so forth. You get all that information from it. I think it's a relatively small step if we didn't have occupational licensing to think of a website like that, just going the extra step and saying, providing some kind of minimum assurance that any electrician or anybody they're going to allow to list electrician services on their website meets some kind of quality threshold or certification level that Angie's List or other websites would be happy or would accept, and that then ultimately their customers would accept too.
Mm-hmm. So far we've been talking about quality as just a consistent level of quality, but doesn't quality actually vary from one person to another? Don't they look for different aspects of quality, especially in judging these types of services? Could a private system for occupational licensing like that, like the ISO UL model, actually work and coordinate all those different measures of quality that consumers desire?
Well, you're right in that quality has many different facets, and it's also hard to measure. And we mentioned the fact that sometimes ways that you try to measure quality run into a problem of just looking how much people are spending on something and hoping it correlates with quality. And so you get a high rating from, say, the U.S. News and World Report college rankings if you spend a lot on your library, whether that actually translates into a better quality library or not. And so there are lots of different dimensions of quality you could care about, and there are better or less effective ways to try to measure that. In a market-based system, you're likely to see the elements of quality that get measured and the mechanisms that you use to try to measure that correlate as closely as possible with the what the end customers value. I mean, you can take the example of insurance companies. Insurance companies simply aren't going to pay for fire protection ratings that aren't tied closely to actual losses and fires. So if ISO wasn't doing a good enough job going out there and actually measuring the elements of fire protection that correlate into getting fires put out faster and saving more of a house, keeping the damage limited instead of a total loss, then insurance companies just aren't going to continue to pay for those rankings. And again, nothing's perfect, and there are differences across consumers, so that what one person thinks of as quality may not be the same as others. But market-based systems provide probably more feedback to exactly what the customers ultimately care about.
So we mentioned ISO, we've mentioned UL, Angies List. Are there other examples of private provided quality assurance?
Yes, there are, and I think a couple of good examples are provided in the area of meteorology and broadcast meteorology in particular. The American Meteorological Society back in the 1950s started a voluntary certification program for TV meteorologists, because at the time, there were many people on the air. Television had only recently been innovated, so you have television news, you have a lot of people on the air doing the weather who knew nothing really about weather forecasting. It might have been entertaining, tell jokes, but they didn't really know very much about the weather. And so the American Meteorological Society in the 1950s came up with a certification program to try to certify this. And if you're a broadcast meteorologist, you could get one. You could go through their program, meet their standards, and then you could get this AMS seal of approval, and then your television station could run that symbol at the start of your weathercast to show that you actually were a certified meteorologist. And more recently, the National Weather Association is another group that has offered its own version of certification. And that can be one way in which you could deal with some different elements of quality. So if there are some TV stations or viewers that might be more concerned about the types of the way the National Weather Association certifies quality, then they could go with that certification and not AMS. So it allows a little more diversity. But the AMS Seal of Approval program, the older of these, has been widely attributed by many different observers with having improved the quality of broadcast meteorology immensely. And I've done some research that actually shows that AMS certified broadcasters, the number of AMS certified broadcasters working in a metropolitan area actually reduces the number of tornado fatalities that you have when tornadoes hit as well. So I mean, there are actually some evidence that it seems to have been a very effective and completely voluntary or market-based method of assuring quality of professional services.
So should we be concerned, leading up to the financial crisis, private bond rating agencies such as Moody's, Standards, and Fitch's, that they knowingly misclassified a lot of the bonds that they were rating and kind of rated them higher than they actually were in practice? Should that actually concern us when we're talking about applying this quality assurance to other market mechanisms? It
certainly should, because it certainly looks like a type of market-based quality certification, because Standard & Poor's and Moody's are private companies, and they perform their service for, if somebody's coming out with a bond issue and they'd like to have that bond rated, they will pay Standard & Poor's, for instance, to rate their bond issue. So it is a market-based system, but I would say it's not a completely market-based system, because there are a number of government regulatory restrictions on, like, for instance, what pension plans can invest in, and those are tied to ratings from these agencies. And there's only 3 government-approved rating agencies. So if none of them are doing a good job, you're actually limited in your ability to turn to some new emerging agency. So it's a case where we have a little bit of mixed both government and private assurance.
Can you give us your concluding thoughts on quality assurance markets?
Well, it's a challenging problem that markets face to try to come up with ways to assure quality. But I think the examples of the insurance service office and fire protection agencies show that there are some sustainable ways to do this over time, to maintain a high quality assurance of expert services for over a century, and in a way that insurance companies are willing to pay for. And so it certainly shows there's a potential there. Well, that's all the end of our time. Thank you very much, and join us again next time for another EconVersations.